Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It's a privilege and a pleasure to introduce Dr. She deserves to be Dr. Zeenut Ziad. I have had the pleasure of knowing her since the University of Karachi. But she was, of course, 15 years junior to me, but somehow we just managed to get to know each other. There is Amina. Our friendship has grown. May I say this is an extraordinary individual who has retained her passionate commitment to Pakistan despite being dragged away by a very cruel husband called Ziad al-Adab. They've spent decades in Europe, in Africa, in the United States. They recently sold their multi-million-dollar property in Washington, D.C., moved back to Pakistan. So great is their commitment. And it's a commitment not just of family. Look at the way they've nurtured two children, Humaira and Waleed. Both of them doctors, but doctors in what? Doctors who are steeped in Islamic and Persian and South Asian history. Humaira heads an interfaith center in the United States. Now
director of Islamic Studies.
Now director of the Islamic
Studies
Studies
Center at Johns Hopkins.
at Johns Hopkins. And Waleed, who recently concluded a brief stay at Habib University, is one of the distinguished alumni of Yale University and is now teaching at North Carolina. And Zeenut on her own is an author who has great respect for knowledge and lucidity, as you will see in her presentation. The finest value, Dr. Zeenut Ziad. And, sorry, she has also acted as my secretary in a stage play called The Man Who Came to Dinner.
अबे दूसरा भी तो था, दो थे. Amina, you can come and make it very brief because I think. Huh? It was also very long.
अच्छा. No, my apologies for being late, but बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आप सब तशरीफ़ लाए. Most welcome, and I would like to thank Mr. Farooq Hassan for hosting this wonderful event. And I cannot tell you how much interest there has been in this. People have been telling me, oh, but there's this wonderful presentation on the Mughals, and please add me to your mailing list. So there's, I think Zeenut, you've really created a lot of interest. All I want to say very quickly is that, I mean, you know about Zeenut because the information was sent to you. I just want to say that we have known each other for decades. And
Same time, same play.
yes, absolutely. And I think this is going to be a riveting presentation. And I'm very passionate about this because I feel that the Mughals have been reviled and they have been maligned in history. And whatever we have read about them is what we have learned from the colonial accounts. So I think this is really going to be something that will be a revelation for all of us. And thank you so much, Zeenut, for coming all the way from Islamabad to make this presentation. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you all. Will you be able to say anything from there? Because that's very important. Thank you all for coming. It's indeed a privilege and an honor for me to be in such a distinguished gathering. And Amina, thank you so much for the invitation. And I particularly commend you for choosing to reintroduce the Mughals. Why reintroduce? Because since 1857, fake news, which we all know now, what the damage it does, fake news and fabrications about the Mughals were propagated by the colonialists. And tragically, even since 1947, we've just been regurgitating this. But the great news is that in the last 30 to 40 years, there has been a surge of scholarship using primary sources in Farsi, in Sanskrit, in Urdu, in Hindi, and all the regional languages in Arabic, which has opened the door to a dramatically different world that existed on our soil, not what we know today. And you'll be very proud to know that apart from the American and the European new scholars, there are dozens upon dozens of brilliant young Pakistanis who are searching for their history, who have done groundbreaking research and totally overturned the colonial narrative. So I will state up front, I'm here to celebrate our history and our heritage. And yes, this talk challenges conventional wisdom, everything that we've been told. But you are obviously people who are up to the challenge. You've come with an open and receptive mind, right? Terrific. Okay, so based on this new research, what did Mughal rule accomplish? That's the Mughal Empire at its height. At that point, there were 150 million people in the subcontinent. This was the largest country in the world, comparable only to China, Europe, and please listen to these because it's only when you see the things relative. The entire Europe at that point was only 100 million people. This was 150 million people, and there was no place on earth which had more languages, cultures, religions, cults, nationalities, ethnicities than the subcontinent. And the Mughals were a tiny minority. The Mughals successfully integrate this lot in that time, 150 million people of diverse ethnic and religious backgrounds, fostered a cultural renaissance and created the wealthiest empire of its time. Their empire had the world's strongest currency. Mr. Raza Baqir, please note, a highly efficient fiscal, monetary and administrative system, the world's highest exports, speedy and equal justice, and a formidable war machine. Pretty impressive, right? That's why it was the superpower of the day. How did this happen here? The Mughal success in the subcontinent must be seen in the context of Muslim empires worldwide and the Persianate world in particular. Now, historians refer to the Persianate world, that is all that region which was influenced by the ancient Persian civilization. Okay, and just to, well, we'll go into that later. So let's step back even one further step into our history. It is a unique fact that wherever Muslims settled, they catalyzed the indigenous cultures and civilizations evolved where artists and intellectuals of every faith and persuasion flourished, from West Africa to Indonesia and everywhere in between. Why was this? Because at that time, Islam, or the way the Muslims understood their religion, it was a universal message. It was not only for the Muslims of Makkah and Medina. It was to bring peace, justice, and prosperity to the world. Islam provided the radical spark, and this, across the board, historians agree on this. There were the principles of egalitarianism, we've forgotten that, individual dignity, and humanism, respect for all traditions, we've forgotten that as well. And Islam privileged knowledge and reason alongside faith and spirituality. There was no contradiction in Islam between reason and faith. So now remember, I think all of us know this, that, or at least we believe this, that God sent 124,000 prophets, which meant, what does that mean for a person who believes that? It means that every tradition has something of value. So wherever Muslims spread their liberating ideas, they were just as eager to learn. And because they were confident, they could filter out the best of every tradition. civilizations evolved as a two-way process. What the Muslims brought and what they took, an exchange of ideas. Unity was not uniformity in Islam. That's another lesson we've forgotten. We should all act and think, oh, we don't, Saudis don't think, but we should all act and look like Saudis. No. Each Muslim state retained its own characteristics. So within 10 years, 642 of the death of our Prophet, peace be upon him, Muslims had conquered all of Persia and encountered one of the world's oldest and most sophisticated civilizations. This was Iran. The whole of Pakistan from here to there was under Persian empires for millennia, parts, sometimes the whole. This whole area, Central Asia, Iran, Iraq, up to Greece. And the first major, Persia created the first major multicultural empire, 600 BC, the Achaemenid Empire, from the Indus to the Aegean. And these were those amazing rulers like Darius, like Cyrus, and they developed an excellent infrastructure and administration, generated prosperity, urbanization, and a cosmopolitan, highly refined culture. Having to deal for the first time with problems of empire, the Muslims, Arabs, who had, of course, had been nomads, readily absorbed ideas from the Persians. That was the major influence on the Muslims that followed. It was this Islam, infused with Persian culture, that spread rapidly through this vast region. Because you see, this whole region from here to there was already this wonderful multicultural mix, basically under the influence of the Persian ideas, and they were able to absorb Islam because Islam adapted to that culture. Great centers of learning were established everywhere, and particularly Turkestan. You know this area we call Central Asia today? This was Turkestan. Bukhara rivaled Baghdad. And you know, we hear of all these genius polymaths, the Ibn Sinas, the Al-Khwarizms. They were not Arabs. They were all from this area. They were all part of the Persianate world. The cross-fertilization occurred from here all the way to Spain. This was the age of genius polymaths. We're talking about, you had Al-Khwarizm, Al-Farabi, Rumi, Ibn Hayam, Al-Baruni, Ibn Haytham, Al-Kindi, Razi, Ibn Sina. I mean, you know, these are names you think maybe they've come out of Arabia. They didn't. They were the Persianate world. This was the time of the development of Tasawwuf and Tariqas, Sufism and the Sufi orders. The greatest discoveries in science, arts, Muslim jurisprudence, fiqh and hadith studies, Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sahih Tirmizi, all came out of this region. It was from Central Asia that Islam, now richly flavored with many cultures, was spread by Sufis throughout the subcontinent. You had the effects of ideas and effects and cultures of Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Chinese, Greek, Turkic, Indian, Judaism and Christianity. Pakistanis, being part of the Persianate world, are inheritors of the world's richest heritage, and we ought to be immensely proud of it. Every tradition that was there, we actually are the inheritors of. So the Mughals, of course, we all know where they came from, and that was around, where is Uzbekistan? You know, Tashkent, around there is the Farghana. It was all part of the Timurid Empire. The Mughals brought their inclusive vision from Central Asia, but it took their special genius to create a glorious celebration of diversity. And I want to use the word celebration because this was not just tolerance, oh, I accept you, and so on. This was a celebration of diversity in the subcontinent, and they fostered a uniquely beautiful synthesis of cultures. The subject is vast. So this evening I'll confine myself, and I talk too much about them also, so please correct me on time when it's getting too late. So the subject is vast, so this evening I'll confine myself to the 6 great Mughals and focus on their extraordinary political system and governance, so relevant for Pakistan today. And let me give you a quick snapshot of these fascinating, multi-talented great Mughals. And when we talk about it, it's so depressing to see what specimens we have today. When you compare them to these giants. They were highly educated with an ingrained sense of justice. They were masters of realpolitik, power politics. They were proud Muslims who fostered religious harmony. They were connoisseurs of all the arts with an extraordinary talent to create beauty. They were also great romantics. A deeply loved, strong woman was at the center of their lives. Strong woman. Now the story then starts right here. And how many of you have seen this gorgeous place? Oh, too few. Please, please, please go to Samarkand and Bukhara, because that's where, the most beautiful structures and the most beautiful ambience was created. This is the Registan Madrasa, and madrasas, we understand them as seats of higher learning, not reduced to what we consider it today. This was the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology of the medieval age. Okay, Registan Madrasa Samarkand. This was built by Taimur's grandson Ulugh Beg, and God bless the Agha Khan. He was responsible for restoring it, and it is just, you just get overwhelmed when you stand and see this. Now, in fact, I'll just give you a quick, I know this takes up in the time, but that fractal geometry, decorative designs, you must be, I hope you've traveled all over Pakistan as well, because you have some of the most incredible geometrical patterning on all our ancient shrines and tombs and mosques and buildings. These patterns that you see here, you can't see them very clearly. When you look at them, you are really blown away by the absolute gorgeous geometry. In 2007, 2 highly qualified scientists from Harvard were visiting for some conference. They looked around and they said, hey, this patterning is crazy. I mean, they suddenly, it sparked something in them. They said, it cannot be. How is this patterning on this building of 500 years ago? So they, took photographs, took it back, and they said that, I was reading the report about that in 1975, a new branch of mathematics was discovered in Harvard, which is known as fractal geometry. It is the branch of where mathematics and art have been brought together. This was invented in the West in 1975. When these guys saw that and they analyzed, and that was only invented because computers were available to them. They said these are fractal geometry designs applied on buildings. And they said, so these guys were fully aware of fractal geometry at that time. So this is the kind of beauty, knowledge, learning, inclusive spirit that Babur came with. And he was a 12-year-old prince in search of a kingdom. He conquered Samarkand, he conquered this place at age 14, only to lose. I mean, I don't know what they fed kids in those days, because they were like conquering places at 12 and 11 and, you know. So at age 14, he conquers it, loses it, and then he really, really has a difficult, adverse time. But he wins Kabul in 1504 when he's only 21 years old. And then, I mean, well, what do you do when you've still got lots of energy and you're very talented? So he says, let me conquer India. So 1526, he embarks on and by the way, that's all people did in those days. This wasn't like only the Mughals went around conquering every single place on earth. This is what was happening. It was the context of the time. So he embarks on a risky adventure, the conquest of India, with a mere 12,000 men. He defeats 100,000 strong army, and they had 1,000 war elephants of Ibrahim Lodi. Military historians all over the world extol Babur's tactical brilliance. It was the earliest use of artillery and gunpowder anywhere in the world. 12,000 people and 100,000. I mean, obviously, the guy was a genius. And they count this battle amongst the greatest ever fought. And what is one of Babur's first actions in his new capital of Agra? He plants a garden. That was how wonderfully multifaceted they were. Oops, sorry, jumped. There is Babur planting a garden. Babur right there. And that was his delight, right? Raised with the refined aesthetics of the Persianate Islamic worlds, he was a lover of nature, a sensitive poet, he was a music composer and a critic. And Babur was a disciple of the Sufi saints who taught and lived the inclusive spirit of Islam, the oneness of humanity, and the validity of all religious truth. So one of the first things he does, he visits, and his warriors visit the Hindu temple. Now you can see they're as different from Babur, but he goes to pay his respects there. Sufism is the spiritual heart of Islam that centers on God's mercy, love, and beauty. The Mughals, both men and women, were deeply imbued with the humanism of Sufi teaching. In a remarkable autobiography, Babur bears his soul, and I don't know why it isn't the Tuske Babri or the Baburnama should be compulsory reading for all young men and women. I mean, this is a story of how courage and perseverance in the face of really incredible odds. It's a study of profile in courage. And it is considered to be one of the world's finest memoirs. And he talks in his, you see his humane and his liberal vision. And if any of you have a chance to read Babur's, I couldn't copy the whole thing, Letter to Humayun. It's in the same vein as Hazrat Ali's letter to the governor of Egypt of how do you govern. And where he says that Hindustan is a land of many creeds, cleanse yourself of all religious bigotry. Give justice according to the tenets of each community. There should be no cow sacrifice, and you will conquer the hearts of your people. I mean, don't even do cow sacrifice, okay? Do not damage temples. Ignore, and then of course, coming down to Muslims, ignore the disputations of Shias and Sunnis, for therein lies the weakness of Islam. Do your utmost to bring this population that God has given you to govern. I mean, it's a brilliant letter. Anyway, poor Babur, unfortunately, fate did not permit him to consolidate his new empire, and in 1530 he died, aged only 47. And then you have Humayun. Humayun succeeded to the throne as the empire encountered a turbulent period. State formation was put on hold. He was a great scholar, very scientifically minded, and used to carry his favorite books when he went off to battle. You know, I mean, I can't be without my books. So, a lover of art, he invited the two greatest painters of Iran to train Indian artists. thereby initiating one of the world's most admired painting styles, the Mughal miniature. With great perseverance, Humayun himself reclaimed the throne. Here he is, he's having to fight his brother because the brother was refusing to, give up. But he again died unexpectedly in 1556, leaving a shaky throne to his 13-year-old son, Akbar, now acknowledged as one of the greatest rulers of all time. Akbar ruling at 13, okay? Mughal, now this is very interesting. This is important to remember this because we've been given such a vile sort of picture of these people, of these, the Mughals. The Mughal princes, how were they trained? They didn't just come out of a vacuum. Mughal princes at age 4 were sent to Sufi masters for ethical and religious education so that a strong sense of accountability to God was internalized. And this was the Islam of ethical principles, not the Islam of empty rituals. Their young prince with mystics. This was part of their very rigorous training in the responsibilities of kingship. At age 10, they were sent to the far corners of the empire to gain first-hand experience of politics and administration. They actually had to learn what are the problems of the people, who do I ally with, how can I solve this, what are the special geographical, whatever conditions of the people. And that's how you successfully govern, if you know your people and you have the sense of responsibility to them. By 12 years old, they had also accomplished military training and were ready to take charge in a battle. Of course, literary and artistic skills were also imparted. Now, Akbar, of course, was absolutely unique. Akbar didn't learn to read or write. Some say he was dyslexic. But he had a prodigious memory, mastered numerous skills, had a profoundly inquisitive mind, and inherited his family's outstanding taste in the arts. Akbar took full charge of his realm because he had a regent with him, but he took full charge of his kingdom at 17 years old. This was in 1560. He was a fearless teenager and commanded respect for his strategic abilities in battle, and a generous and open nature won the loyalty of men. It was soon evident that here was a man with an all-encompassing vision, expanding, integrating, and enriching his empire to bring stability, peace, and prosperity. Now, what about stability, right? By the way, so these were, this should come a little later, I think. Hindu rulers, right. Akbar built his state on the foundation of accommodation, local autonomy, and alliances. After a conquest, he exacted no revenge. Administrative structures were left as they were, and following Muslim tradition, defeated enemies were forgiven. Please note, Pakistani rulers. Their fortunes restored, and they were invited to participate in the joint enterprise of state building. And this was, by the way, the example had been set by the Prophet. Please recall, when he conquered Makkah, did he kill the entire population? They had been his absolute, bitter enemies. He forgave them, gave them gifts, and said, okay, you run Makkah as you want. And he went back to Medina. And this was an example followed by, I shouldn't say all, but by and large by Muslim rulers. So the concept of making partners of your opponents, this was something Akbar was just, excelled at. And as I said, this is a lesson for Pakistan today. How do you bring peace, prosperity? You bring your opponents on board if you have to build Pakistan. And then he came up with some, really, he was only 19. And he said, look, I'll have to marry Hindu princesses because I have to build the, alliances with them. So this was a policy his successors maintained. And such alliance building won the loyalty of powerful Rajas for generations. And they were known as the Khanzadas. They were the sons of the Mughal dynasty. And there was practically a family relationship between the Hindu Rajas and this dynasty. The empire expanded as Akbar achieved an unbroken series of military victories. He was invincible. And that's what the people began to believe, that he's, he's really has had some particular power from God. As it became apparent that peace and good governance were assured, many states pledged allegiance to the Mughals. They just, when you see, well, fine, I'm not being deprived of my patrimony and I'm allowed to rule my state and I'm part of a bigger, stable enterprise, why wouldn't I want to join? And for the Hindu, particularly for the Rajput Rajas, they were constantly fighting each other. They were constantly, conquering each other's territory. So now they had peace. They said, fine, at least we're not going to be attacked by our neighbors because the Mughal Empire is maintaining the peace. So, of course, it was not always milk and honey. There were power struggles at the court and periodic rebellions, and there was a nephew rebelling here and a sort of cousin there and a Raja here. And so it was, believe you me, a busy time for an emperor. Akbar was also, and mind you, he was also very highly involved in the development of his military, and they were innovating. Their weaponry was equivalent to the weaponry anywhere else in the world. The organization that Akbar had set up in one day, a tent city for 100,000 people would be set up when Akbar went to battle. And then as he arrived at that place, this tent city for 100,000, today we can barely organize, an event. But then there would be another tent city which would go one day ahead, and there it was, it was set up again. Akbar was also nourishing a cultural renaissance, reforming administrative, social and religious policies, undertaking massive infrastructure projects. They were creating engineering masterpieces. Yet he was 26 with no male heir. When you're in this frenzy of activity, it's not surprising he didn't have a male heir. What strength would he have left? But so he sought the prayers of Hazrat Salim Chishti. Now I want you to please look at this very carefully, because this is part of two pieces. There are two works of art. This is Hazrat Salim Chishti holding the rulership of the world. Right? You see his expression, very stern. Because he is saying, and the other picture on the other side is of Akbar standing there in a humble posture, taking this globe. But what this picture symbolizes is that you are being given the rulership under the shadow of God, and you will be accountable to God for how you rule. So it was a sacred trust that these people believed was given to them. You didn't need NAB. Okay, let's put it like that. Because they were accountable to God. NAB, no NABs around. You had these sort of people telling them what to do. So then, of course, when his first son Salim was born, Akbar, in gratitude, we all know this, constructed the new capital at Fatehpur Sikri. Oh, by the way, I should show you this. Akbar visits the tomb of Sufi Saint Moinuddin Chishti at Ajmer. Please see, he used to walk about 50 kilometers barefoot from Agra when he went to for the Urs. And he was treated like anybody else there. Here's Akbar again. Please note a Sufi saint, and Akbar is beseeching them for guidance, that please tell me if I am on the right path. Am I doing what God would desire me to do? And please notice the humble posture, right? He's king of the world at that point. And the saint, of course, you know the story of Hazrat Suleiman and conversing with the animals. It's this whole idea here. So the Buland Darwaza, and the incredible thing in this, which William Dalrymple notes, he says, I went there and I see that this is the doorway to the greatest capital in the world, and on the doorway is carved a saying of Jesus. And he says, I was so stunned, and he says, that's where my first interest came, that here was this Muslim king who held Jesus in such reverence that the doorway to his capital had Jesus' saying on it. And then this was the tomb they built for Salim Chishti, exquisite piece of architecture. Now, the most important thing about Fatehpur Sikri is that here in 13 years, and we don't know this, we are not aware of this, between 1572 and 1585, far-reaching changes were devised that transformed South Asia. The Mughal state was a precisely conceived and meticulously planned enterprise. Akbar, it was a product of the genius of Akbar and his outstanding advisors. For 13 years, Akbar wanted to find out how was India ruled. What are the problems here? How do I plan a state which will respond to the needs of the people and will bring everybody together? So those, and it was all sorts of changes. Obviously, prosperity requires economic change as well. And of course, three of his most outstanding, amongst his advisors, three of the top ones, the commander-in-chief of his army, his finance minister, and his foreign minister, were all Hindus, and his chief advisor was Abul Fazl. To build unity, now this is very interesting, Akbar visualized a secular symbol. Now understand it like this, that you believe in, giving the dignity to everybody, but you want to build a bigger sense of unity. You can only do that in a place where has many nationalities and religions and so on, by creating a secular symbol. And that would be the focus for the people. He wanted to be seen as a just and benevolent head of state and as a father of his people, which was an ancient Indian concept. He wanted to create the bond between the dynasty and the people. So Abul Fazl, they developed a new dynastic ideology that relied on the charismatic authority of the emperor and the dynasty. Thus was built a unique model of mutually reinforcing dual loyalties. Am I making myself clear on this? You have, this is part of the genius, because Akbar recognized that people have multiple identities. You cannot kill the identity of a person and say, no, you have, the European nation state. You either had to kill your individual identity and then the state became your, the focus. Here, this was dual loyalties. I give you an example. Man Singh, the commander-in-chief of the Mughal armies, was posted as governor, and he was to build this new city of Rohtas in Bihar. After building it, he puts up this massive plaque. On the left of the plaque, it's in Persian. It says, I, Raja Man Singh, devoted servant, loyal servant, etc., of the greatest king, Akbar, have built this for my emperor. On the other side, in Sanskrit, it said, I, Man Singh, king of kings, ruler of Ambar, great Rajput, have built this. And that is what the Mughal said. You be proud of who you are and be proud also of being a Mughal citizen. See, this is now finally the EU, after they've been battling in the most terrible wars of nation states. This is something of the concept of the EU. You retain your identity, but you have a larger, an umbrella. So the Mughals were like an umbrella over all these different identities. This was state building at its best, visionary and pragmatic. A new political order, now this is very interesting. A new political order was instituted on the principle of Sulh Kul, universal peace, which was also a Sufi concept. As laid out in the Ain-e-Akbari, the constitution of Akbar, which is the Ain, 1585, what do I say here, 1578, actually the final version was 1585, the righteous ruler protects the life, honor, wealth and religion for everyone regardless of race and religion. So we had our constitution 200 years before the Americans. It was for everyone regardless of race and religion, and the US Declaration of Independence with right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Who was this for? Anybody answer? Rich white men. Okay, those were the only people who enjoyed the right. Women couldn't have the right, blacks couldn't have the right, and people without property didn't have the right to the liberty and the pursuit of happiness. All these came much, much later after struggles by all the people who had been left out. And of course, women didn't get the vote till 1928 or something. So this inclusive vision of empire was perpetuated in one degree or another until the end of the dynasty. The third volume, now this is another amazing project of Akbar's. The third volume of the Ain lays out in great detail the civilizational and religious accomplishments of both Hindus and Muslims. It states that the project was undertaken to promote mutual respect. They say, look, these are the great things Muslims have done, these are the great things Hindu have done. Now you know what each other has done, please don't fight. Please don't hate each other. Be appreciative of each other. Let's remind ourselves what the Quran says about this. 49, Surah 49:13. We have created you all out of a male and female. Equality of mankind, humankind. And have made you into nations and tribes so that you might know each other. You appreciate each other, get on with each other. So, I feel Akbar really did try to implement the Quran's message. And then you have, of course, people like that unbearable Macaulay, who said, all the learning of the Arabs and the Indians was equal, not even equal to one shelf of English books. That was one way, one side. And here was Akbar saying, I want you all to appreciate each other. Okay, then we come to this other amazing thing, the Ibadat Khana. You heard of this? The house of worship, Ibadat Khana? To promote dialogue, Akbar erected the Ibadat Khana at Fatehpur Sikri in 1575, where debates were held between the theologians of different schools of Islam and representatives of all the religions of South Asia. In 1580, Akbar invited Jesuit priests from Goa to participate. The Jesuits received daily allowances, free land in Agra, Lahore, Thatta, and Cambay to build churches and to proselytize. In 15, you see them here, sitting there, and the rest of all these are, Shia, Sunnis, Jains, Hindus, and all the other religions. There even used to be chili worshippers here. Apparently that was a particular cult called the chili worshippers. He said, sure, come along, join the fun. So they were there. Then in 1577, Sikhs were granted Amritsar to erect their golden temple. Imperial land and money, Mughal land and money built mosques, Hindu temples, and they were maintained with the imperial funds. With Akbar's support, Zoroastrians established a school of philosophy to revitalize their faith, because they said, we've lost a lot of our faith moving to India. He said, sure enough, go build your institute, here are the funds. The Mughals translated Hindu and Jain texts into Persian to gain an understanding. They were ruling them. They needed to understand them. They needed to, get their support. And by the way, this was the largest translation exercise in history, apart from what they had done in Baghdad with the Greeks, this Akbar's translation. And he sponsored Hindu and Jain religious scholarship, so much for the BJP. Every effort aimed at encouraging the co-evolution of religions. This has been unheard of then or ever since. The ruler, is saying, I want the religions to evolve together. No parallel to this exists in contemporary history. Just to give you a little perspective, so, we know how unique they were. What was happening in contemporary Europe? For 150 years, from 1560 to 1715, there were the destructive wars of religion, the Protestants and the Catholics. In the 17th century, France was the dominant power. Louis XIV decreed in 1681 that all Protestants will be forcibly converted. In 1572, 70,000 Protestants were killed. The Spanish Inquisition from 1478 to 1834. Islam was banned in 1526. Witch trials were held. Who were the poor witches? Tens of thousands were killed. In the US in 1883, just 2 centuries ago, the ban on the Native American religions, they said your religion is barbarous. And that ban wasn't lifted till 1978. Okay? So multiculturalism is a new concept for Europe. That's why it's so fragile. Don't let anybody tell you that multiculturalism is a Western concept. It's from it was invented here. Okay? So never never feel defensive about it. Prosperity. Stability, prosperity. A massive overhaul of the administration, fiscal, monetary systems created an integrated dynamic economy. I can just mention a few features. Decentralization, merit-based nobility and officials. Ishrat Hussain and a dysfunctional CSP, please note that they were merit-based at that time. And the Mughals created an accountable service nobility. If you didn't produce results, you were out. Cash salaries, reorganization of mints, standardization of coinage, detailed measurement of agricultural land, 10-year statistical surveys. They surveyed the entire land of Hindustan. Statistical surveys of crop yield and prices, substitution of cash pay, and I won't go into details. The result was a rapid increase in efficiency, employment, tax collection, CBR, please note. The Mughals could collect taxes in those days, masses of them. Monetization of the economy, commerce, economic expansion, productivity in agriculture and manufacturing, till the British destroyed the economy in the late 18th century. Have any of you read Shashi Kapoor's Inglorious Empire? Please, please read it. I won't go into the details, except that, I feel he's a moral coward. He talks about how amazing India was, but will never mention that it was Mughal India. Exports flourished. Hafiz Sheikh can also take note. You can make exports flourish. Textiles, dyes, sugar, steel, cash crops, and diamonds. The only imports that the Mughal state did was horses, because horses apparently couldn't breed very well there. The Mughal Empire was the economic powerhouse of the time, 27% of global GDP. It was called the precious metal drain of the world. Till 1700, European traders every year brought 34 tons of silver, half a ton of gold. European silver had to be melted down because the Mughal silver was the purest in the world. That Mughal, I'm wearing the Akbar silver rupee, this was the dollar just about 300 plus years ago, the dollar of the world. It has the Kalma on one side and Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar on the other. And since everything the Mughals created had to be beautiful, master artists designed the coins and poet laureates composed the verses. Akbar's gold mohar, Jahangir's, the exquisite pieces of art. So what they harnessed the energies of the subcontinent through incentives, policies, justice. And this brings me to one of the most important things now, justice, which in Islam is the foundation of successful and stable government. In modern states, we talk about what? We talk about the importance of rule-based government, because if there's no rules, government cannot function. So justice also happens to be the foremost virtue of a ruler in Islamic, Indian, and Persian tradition, and it was considered to be the primary duty of Mughal kings. A hadith, let me quote a hadith. 1 hour, we've forgotten all the good hadiths now. 1 hour of justice outweighs 60 years of worship. Chief Justices of Pakistan, please note. Please, can somebody pass this hadith on to them? The exemplary justice of the Mughals is still remembered today, Adle Jahangir. Now, these are fascinating paintings here. I could spend 1 hour just, describing these paintings, and it really pains me. I'll have to run through this. We're running out of time. This is what they call the allegorical painting, which is symbolic of what the emperor is trying to convey. Okay? Now, what do you see here? There's Jahangir, and there's Abbas, and they've shown Abbas like a little sort of dwarf. So Jahangir is trying to show that I am the emperor of the world. But note what's here. Now he's standing on the globe. So Jahangir, he was the Caesar of the world. So that's, the emperor of the world. What do you see here? Huh? No. What are the two animals here? And the lamb, the lion and the lamb. Is anybody familiar with the biblical? Where is the peace and justice when the lamb will lie with the lion? And this was again, you see, they revered Jesus and Mary, and these biblical sayings were very representative. They put them there to show that, this is how Jahangir wanted to be depicted, that I have done so much justice that in my domain, the lion will lie with the lamb. Meaning that, it's such a safe place that the lion's not going to eat up the lamb, basically. And then you see here Shah Jahan. Again, the same representation. He's showing, again, here, unfortunately, it's very difficult to see this. Here's the lion, here's the lamb, and here actually the lamb's a little bit, I must say, rather frisky. It's licking the lion. It's a little too much. So it's like, I mean, not just am I lying there, but I can even lick the lion and he won't eat me up. So it's one stage beyond. Shah Jahan also believed, Solomon was his great, Hazrat Suleiman was a great model for him. So, in the exhausting daily routine, please listen to this, in the exhausting daily routine of these incredibly hard-working emperors, dispensing of justice began before dawn. When the emperor appeared before huge crowds, this is Emperor Jahangir at the Jharoka. Here, Hindu, Muslim, high, low, men and women could present petitions and expect immediate results. Akbar spent 4.5 hours in this daily interaction with the public, and the tradition continued under his successors. The public then had access for justice to the emperor twice more in the day, because then they could again confront the emperor at the Diwan-e-Aam. And then to ensure that no one was denied justice at night, Jahangir, you know that story, that Jahangir hung an enormous gold chain outside the palace gate that rang a bell in his chamber. So if you wanted justice at 2 in the night, you rang the bell and that bell rang in the emperor's bedchambers. And this is very interesting. Okay, now we can't do anything about the cultural anyway. We'll come to Jahangir. He was renowned for his justice and his concern for the people's welfare. Among the 12 ordinances at the time he was crowned, the first was to provide his subjects with direct access to him. And here, by the way, please see, this was the title of this painting. You see, he's fighting poverty. We hear about that today. He's concerned about income distribution. And this is a brilliant, again, allegorical portrait. There's this miserable creature, that's poverty. Jahangir is shooting at it. Here is the bell of justice of Jahangir's, which goes up to the Lord because he knows that I am accountable to God for my justice. Here again there's the lion and the lamb. And then here is, if any of you are familiar, in Hindu mythology, the giver of justice was Manu. So everything is here. You've got the Christian concept, you've got the Indian concept, you've got the Muslim concept, and you've got the emperor saying that I will fight poverty. I mean, this is just a most amazing painting. Anyway, so Jahangir was a scientist, he was a botanist, zoologist, he conducted field work, classified flora, fauna. He was also a man of exquisite taste and so evident in his glorious art. And that, of course, is Nurja. It's not a real portrait, but whatever, they like to say that this is Nurja. He co-ruled with her, you do know that. He co-ruled with her, and she was incredibly talented, and she was also the empire's best marksperson. They created together, the Mughal aesthetic, so evident today. And Jahangir had a special reverence for saints. Here he is sitting there with a Hindu holy man in a cave. This is Jahangir, and all his retainers are down here. Then this is another lovely allegorical painting where Jahangir is showing that I prefer the Sufi saint over the Ottoman king, and this miserable looking character who's looking very fed up is King James of England because he's been relegated to the bottom of the list. But this is Jahangir's way of saying that's my priorities. Okay, and this is if you see it close, it's a very reverential painting where he's looking at the painting of the Madonna, and he had this painted, or I think the Jesuits maybe brought this for him, and he was revering this painting. Okay, Shah Jahan. In Shah Jahan's extremely competent hands, the empire reached the pinnacle of stability, prosperity, and magnificence. You see, of course, he had the peacock throne. I don't think it is here. No, it isn't. See, this Shah Jahan honors Muslim scholars, including 2 African scholars, one there and here. His particular genius was architecture, in which he displayed his love of symmetry and proportion. And I should please note that despite all his expenditures, we keep saying, oh, Shah Jahan spent, he always had a massive surplus in his budget. There was no shortage of funds. Under his direction, the highly skilled Mughal engineers created marvels of engineering. The Taj Mahal itself is an engineering masterpiece, the intricacies of which specialists are still trying to fathom. They really do not understand how this amazing structure was built. And you know, this just goes to show you just a marble relief work was so exquisite. I mean, imagine the skill of the craftspeople that were there. Now we come to the one everybody loves to criticize, dear old Aurangzeb. And this is where you're in for a surprise, okay? We owe a great deal of debt to Professor Audrey Trushke. She's for setting the record straight for Aurangzeb. Have any of you come across her book? It says Aurangzeb, Audrey Trushke. Please read it. It's a very easy read. But, you know, at least you'll know it's a very slim book. And she did it particularly because she found so repulsive what the BJP was doing. And she said, you are absolutely, you know, absolute straightforward lies. So she did this book specially. She's a very young scholar, Stanford. And her best, the most important thing, she's a scholar of both Sanskrit and Persian. This is a very rare combination. So she read all the Sanskrit books written about. You see, you would think, oh, the people, the Hindus writing Sanskrit would be pulling Aurangzeb apart. So she said, okay, right, I'll read all the Sanskrit books and the Persian. And she used very unusual primary sources. Remember, what has changed in the scholarship? The British just invented things, like they invented Mahmud Ghaznavi as a bloodthirsty invader. They invented so many things. But what the new scholarship is doing, they are searching for the originals, which nobody has touched so far. What were the people saying? What were the scholars saying? What were Jains saying? What were Brahmins saying? What were the average Mughal officials saying? So that's how you create, or you actually present or put together a history which is proven truths. So she puts the blame squarely on the British for turning Aurangzeb into a cartoon villain. To divide and conquer, they invented the myth of timeless Hindu-Muslim hatred by cherry-picking facts. That's what, basically they do today. By cherry-picking facts, he became a convenient target. I believe, and, reading on and the history around Aurangzeb, I believe there were other reasons also. Other facts contributed to the British targeting Aurangzeb. Firstly, in 1688, this horrible East India Company started a despicable slave trade because they had created famine conditions where people were just roaming the streets lost and dying, and they picked them up and they were sending them off to the Bahamas. As soon as Aurangzeb, and this was not for a holiday in the Bahamas, this was to die in the Bahamas. As soon as Aurangzeb found out about this, he rushed and put a stop to it. And they still persisted, and then there was the Child's War. It's called the Child's War. Here's Aurangzeb. By the way, he was a grouch. I mean, we'll talk about it. But his personality wasn't full of joy, and so that was, that's the way he was. By the way, he was a brilliant administrator and soldier. That's him already, leading a war. Well, that's at least second in command to his father. And there's Aurangzeb dispensing justice at the Jharoka. And by the way, he built some very beautiful structures. We don't remember that. Look at this photograph of the Badshahi, and seen like this, it's very exquisite building. So it wasn't that Aurangzeb didn't create beauty. And this was it. So you had the 1690 Childs War. It's the name, this guy's name was Child something or the other. This was the again aggression by the East India Company, because they said, you will give us concessions, and Aurangzeb said, I will not on your terms, you will take them on mine. So the East India Company was defeated by the Mughal fleet commanded by Africans, and the envoy had to prostrate himself before Aurangzeb and promise to behave. You see this? Now that just burns them up. That why did he have to, he had to do, oops, no, that's not a part of it. So he was definitely the most complex of the great Mughals, full of paradoxes. He destroyed, now, 2-3 important points for people who have this, sort of a very black and white opinion. He destroyed a few dozen Hindu temples. And let me tell you, this is an age-old custom, not only of India, but it went straight back to Mesopotamia, to Persia, to Central Asia, that when you defeated your enemy, you may or may not, but you can destroy his shrine, because that you were showing my God is greater than your God. So this was an old Hindu custom. So it wasn't like this was because of religious bigotry. He usually destroyed, or the few dozen or the one that he did, was against those who were rebelling against the Mughal Empire. But he also issued orders protecting many more Hindu temples and generously granted land and stipends to Brahmins. And the most important thing is, under Akbar, Hindus were 22.5% of Mughal nobility. Same way under Shah Jahan. Aurangzeb increased Hindu participation by nearly 50% to 33% of the Mughal nobility became Hindu. And Aurangzeb stated that there ought to be no religious litmus test for Mughal employment. So much Mr. Fazlur Rahman and your other colleagues who were after Atif Mia. Now, had Imran Khan and his advisors known about this, they could have known Mughal history. They could have said that in Aurangzeb's time there was no litmus test. You didn't have to be a Muslim to be employed. Raja Raghunatha was one of his most cherished officers. He was the finance minister of the Mughal Empire. So Trushke says that yes, Aurangzeb was a man of his time and cannot be reduced only to his faith. He tried to be a just king, a good Muslim, and a sustainer of Mughal culture, but above all justice, but many times he gave up these ideals in the hunt for raw power. Today, let me sum up. Today, even the British acknowledge Mughal greatness. In 2012, the British Library put up a stunning exhibition of previously unseen Mughal treasures. The Daily Telegraph, which of course is the mouthpiece of conservatives, reviewed this and had the headline, Mughals were one of the most civilized visionary societies the world has ever known. And in the next paragraph, we have to reconsider the Mughal Empire as one of the most progressive in history. And by the way, I haven't told you anything about the social reforms, what they did for practically every aspect. We've just been discussing a very limited sector. In conclusion, I would say everywhere a divisive, hate-filled, exclusionary, joyless narrative has been created. It's in our country as well as the rest of the world. We need to draw valuable lessons from our Mughal history and find inspiration in their vision. Their time is now, in the condition of the world today. We need that inspiration. Thank you. Okay. Iqbal, thank you. You only snoozed 3 times. I said you only snoozed 3 times. That was really brave. No, I'm joking. Exactly. I'm joking.
Any questions?
Ji.
Tried for 13 years how to consolidate the empire. How was he then?
1575, right? So, not that old. Sorry, 1572. Okay, 1560 he was 17. In 1570 he would be 27. They're just like 29 or 30. Because he just built Fatehpur Sikri. Sorry, of course he built it at age 29. But you see, this was a very planned exercise. It wasn't just a random, okay, fine, I've got an empire, let me pull out the money and run. The way we run our government today, it's the colonial model, extract the money and run, take it abroad. That's the colonial model. This has nothing to do, I mean, if we really understood a Mughal model, maybe we might be better rulers. You see, basically, well, Aurangzeb had a difficult time, obviously, because they were sort of stretching their things. They came drooling, okay? India was the wealthiest place on earth. And everywhere, from every place on earth, people were coming to try and share in the wealth. It was the manufacturing powerhouse. I wouldn't call it India, I'd call it Hindustan, because, it was Afghanistan as well. So, basically, initially, when they came begging to be given some concessions to trade. And they were treated very well. Fine, you want to trade, go trade, and under these conditions. So the whole of that century, it was great, the 17th century, and then into the 18th also. But it's only somewhere in the middle of the 18th century where they started seeing that the center was, fragile, or the central authority was weakening, and they just jumped in there.
Zeenut,
Sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Akbar's concept of Deen-e-Ilahi. For he's been vilified for that.
Exactly.
And I wanted your clarification on that.
Yes, it's one of the favorite things they like to come up with, okay? Actually, it's an irrelevant issue. As Dr. Anne-Marie Schimmel wrote very well about that, it's a chapter in the book, Akbar wanted to show himself as I said, the charismatic leader. There was at that point this creation of a larger entity, that the emperor was an entity above religions. I mean, if he had to rule such a multitude of religions, he had to be above religions. He didn't want to create a new religion. The Deen-e-Ilahi was something like, you could say, like a Sufi order, a Sufi institution. At its height, it had 19 members. Okay, so he was trying to tie his loyal, important supporters to him in this kind of a Sufi saint and disciple, a kind of a disciple bonding, where they would also act in a manner which was completely just and unbiased towards all the religions in the land. Yes, there were people like Badayuni and others who said, he's left he's left Islam. He didn't leave Islam, he was implementing Islam. He was implementing the ethical principles of Islam. And, the so-called Deen-e-Ilahi disappeared. I mean, in fact, Man Singh said, sorry, but, not me, sir. He said, okay, fine. And Man Singh was one of the closest and most loyal nobles. So, didn't sort of go anywhere much. However, this concept of the sacred king, remember this was the 1,000 years that when Akbar was ruling, the 1,000 years of Islam. And they say the millennium, and there was everybody in Persia, in Central Asia, and everywhere else. People were there was this kind of religious fervor, and they were saying, we hope that there will be somebody who can reform our religion. It was supposed to be a reformer, supposed to come every millennium. So yes, they were politically astute. They said, fine, I mean, we fit into that category. I am trying to reform. This is a task given to me by God. And he was trying to tie people to him on that basis. Ji.
Thank you, madam. First of all, thank you for a very excellent perspective on Mughals. Very, very interesting reading. We have read these aspects also, but there are few perplexing aspects, I think, which are somehow, not very consistent with, I would say, with at least what I have read. So maybe I have read the other perspective. But you said, and I think it has been mentioned in many narratives, that India had 27% of the GDP at that time of the world. Now,
at its height, yeah.
Yeah, at its height. Now, what surprises me is that, what was the innovation and how many scientists, did we produce, and things like what was the standard of education. Like, for instance, when we look at the West, universities like Oxford and Cambridge, these institutions were built 700 years ago. But we do not hear any, top university or educational institution being built that at least has survived. We have not seen any scientific discoveries during that time. Now, at that time, when you look at in 16th century Renaissance Europe, the kind of art that you see in the Western world, the Michelangelos of this world, etc.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
The Mughal miniatures of this world. Please, let's not bring art.
There can be
because
debate.
They were no, because what you are claiming is that the only valid art is when it's completely realistic. That was the first and only time in human history.
Okay, but
in Europe where that happened.
That may be debatable.
Yeah.
But what about the scientific? Because you
yes,
see,
I know. No.
I mean,
this is a very this
just
is a
one
common
point
question
before
I'll
just conclude. I'm not here to debate. Obviously, I am here to learn from you. In 15th century in Europe, there were chartered companies. They started going out to conquer the entire world. The shipping, was they started building navies and the maritime economies way back in 14th century. All right, and in 1492. Columbus discovered America, so he went there. He had great ships. He raised that, money, and then.
Well, I could spend another hour telling you about that. And as far as Europe is concerned, there's a very interesting book you might like to. It's on Mughal military history, where I'm just picking up one aspect of it because simply, I would say that perhaps were you aware that. Thatta and Sialkot had 400 madrasas each, and madrasas were seats of higher learning. Were you aware of that? in Mughal times. Are you aware of this? No, precisely. So this is what we are learning. Okay, there were madrasas throughout. I mean, I was trying to tell you that Registan, that is the tradition he is coming out of. It was a seat of great discoveries. What is unparalleled is the engineering of the Mughals. Remember, you cannot keep today. I mean, the only way I can perhaps make you understand this. First of all, each area has its very unique. We never judge. We can judge it on their contemporary world, right? China today has not created a new science. They have not made massive scientific discoveries. What they are doing, and they are going to overtake the US in 10 years in the military forces. They haven't invented military forces. They have used technology. They have innovated on technology. They have refined technology. Mughal, I mean, I'm taking the example of military because, that may make sense to you. Until the middle of the 18th century, Mughal weaponry and arms and forces were totally equivalent to Europe. In fact, Mughals invented rocketry. Okay? Their innovations in rocketry and camouflage are way beyond what anything Europe had. You should even see, Google this thing, it's Mughal, the innovations in their, or the quality of their weaponry was just absolutely outstanding. Okay, I'm just giving you one example. This same person who's written this book on Mughal armed forces and weaponry talks about the fact Hindustan didn't need to go out and conquer the world. Hindustan was a world in itself. It's known as a subcontinent. The only navy they needed was to guard their coast. It was a literal navy or a navy for the riverine areas. This guy says it would have been a ridiculous luxury to build a fleet. Where would you be taking it? Okay, maybe you wanted to conquer East Africa. I mean, why? It was difficult enough, and I think satisfactory in terms of prosperity to make India the richest place. Why would the Europeans? Then he points out, he said, what was happening, and this is partly the reason why then weaponry started declining. It was the best stable place on earth, Hindustan. The Europeans were killing each other daily. The states were eating each other up daily. It was survive or innovate. For them, their survival was because your enemies were all around you ready to finish you off. And not just finish you off, but physically, genocide, So they had to innovate. And this was one of the reasons. I mean, how did Europe has actually only come on the world scene for 500 years when Columbus sailed. Columbus sailed with, his navigator was Jewish, taught by Muslim schools, right? So it wasn't that the Muslims were lacking in navigational skills. In fact, Columbus couldn't have got there without his navigator, who was taught in Spanish academies. So when you talk about that, that is the first time that Europe acquired wealth. And that's the first time Europe became a player on the world scene, when they took the silver and the gold out of South America. And exactly, okay. So, we actually don't know about this. And inshallah, this wonderful thing is that we're, in each, just these two books I recently came across on the military history by De La Garza and Gomez. They're both American scholars. Excellent, showing you what was happening in terms of innovation. And they said the Mughal army was invincible. So, why would they need to go out and loot other countries? They had enough at home. The Europeans needed to do that.
Last two quick questions, Sarat.
Sweetheart, I used to teach. courses, of eight lectures. One was only on women. Maybe next, we may have another occasion where we could talk about, the cultural renaissance, the social reforms, the art, the women. My God, those women were powerful. At the time when the biggest problems were going on in Kabul, Akbar puts his sister Bakhtun-Nisa, she says, go, get the Afghan tribes in order. In 3 years, she's cleaned the Afghan tribes, got Kabul in order, comes back home. 100 years later, again, the whole Afghan tribes are all getting, rebellious. Aurangzeb says, there's this lady, Shujat, something her name is, I'll just say. Oh, my dear, in 3 years, she sorted out the Afghan tribes. Khalas, come back home. I used to tell the Americans, we used to meet American sort of officers and administration people. I said, guys, just send a proper woman out there, for God's sake. You'll solve your problem. Go back home. Okay. Please, I know it's...
Thank you so much, Zeenut. I think that was absolutely riveting. I hope you enjoyed it. And I think a big round of applause for Zeenut, please. Well, maybe your next one can be on the Mughal queens and princesses. And I just want to say that our next speaker will be Dr. Malia Lodhi. So we will be announcing the date. So thank you very much, and thank you, Farooq Hassan Saab, for very kindly hosting this event. Assalamu alaikum.